Welcome to Prisma Interviews. I'm really delighted to have today Bram Borggreve, who's joining us. Actually, he's visiting the Berlin Prisma office. So first of all, welcome, Bram. It's really nice having you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for having me. It's great being here.
And I'd like to give a short introduction. Some of you may be familiar with Bram, but in case not, Bram is a software engineer and educator who is passionate about improving developer productivity and making programming more accessible and easier for existing and new developers. You currently work at the Kin Foundation as a senior technical advisor, and you are the founder of a foundation called BeeSoft Labs, which aims to educate underprivileged people in Colombia, and hopefully in the future beyond that.
That's totally correct. Yeah.
So welcome. And you have actually been quite an active Prisma user for a couple of years now. Is that correct?
That's correct. About 2 years, maybe a bit more, I think. Starting with Prisma 1 and then moved along with you guys to Prisma 2.
Thank you for that.
It's one of the best technical decisions I ever made. And it's not only because I'm sitting here that I say it, I truly mean it. It's been a life-changing tool and something I've been looking for quite a while, but I never really realized that I was looking for it until I had it. So, yeah.
Well, it sounds interesting, and I'd love to hear. I imagine in those 2 years, you've had quite a fair bit amount of time to experiment and to use this. Really, you have quite a lot of background as a freelancer. You've been working with a lot of different clients. Yeah. So I'm curious, how do you use Prisma these days, and what is sort of the main value that Prisma gives you?
I'd say the main value is the quick iteration over data modeling without having to worry about all the details of how it actually gets stored. I think of the data layer as basically the DNA of your application. So if you form it well, if you create a good data layer, then your application will be able to do a lot of things. And Prisma really enables this for me to do it in a way that's very easy and easy to instruct other people on how to use it. And that's why I actually started using it in the first place. I tend to build a lot of prototypes for people or MVPs for companies. And it's like invaluable to have a tool that allows you to quickly iterate on these kind of things.
I see. And so what technology stack do you use these days mostly? Do you have a single stack that you use, or is it really depending on the use case that you're confronted with?
It kind of depends on the use case, but I do a lot of new applications and then generally I get to decide. So it's mostly Node.JS as the backend using the Nest.js framework. So it's all TypeScript. Prisma obviously fits in very well. So the stack I mainly use, if you would ask me today, it would be an NX workspace, which allows you to build TypeScript apps in a monorepo. Nest.js repo that communicates to Prisma with Postgres. And then on the front end, Angular with GraphQL and Angular and or React. So depending on the client.
Okay, so on the front end, essentially you use Angular or React, and the main interface that you use to communicate with the backend is GraphQL.
Correct. Yeah.
And so you're constructing these GraphQL APIs using Prisma as sort of the main connector to the data store. And how are you using the Nest.js GraphQL?
Correct. Nest.js GraphQL implementation, which is a declarative way to build your GraphQL endpoints. So it works with TypeScript decorators, and you basically add decorators to a class, which converts them into a resolver or in a GraphQL field or object type. And it really cuts out a lot of duplication. The same way as I don't have to write any backend queries for my database, I don't have to write any GraphQL queries on the front end because I use type generation. So there's two important generation steps in this stack. One is from Prisma, the backend, and the other one is from the API to the front end.
So let's pause there for a moment. So the first generation step that you mentioned is the Prisma one, where it generates essentially the TypeScript types and also, the migrations, but that's when you're sort of evolving your schema. But assuming that you have your schema established, you use Prisma generate as a command that generates these types for you that you then use essentially in your queries and so on.
Yeah.
And Nest, when you're constructing the GraphQL schema using these classes and the decorators, the output of that code generation process is essentially the GraphQL schema. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Nest.js on start, it generates a GraphQL schema. And this then gets picked up by GraphQL CodeGen as their input. And I only write queries in the front end that I actually use. And then from there on, in GraphQL CodeGen, you can have it generate only Angular code or React hooks, if you will. But I've always also generated codes for my end-to-end tests. So I often want to do an end-to-end test on the API level. So I make sure that the things get handled the way I expect. And I decided to use GraphQL for that as well. And it's super powerful because I think one of the most important things with this whole stack is that it's fully type safe. I mean, it's not 100%, but it's very close. There's still some things where it's not there, but it's mostly type safe. So if you do something that cannot be done, it will warn you in dev time. And this is a very important property because you don't want this to happen in production. You'd rather not have it in CI. You just basically want to have it while you're developing on this.
This is really the holy grail of development. I can imagine that 10 years ago, this would have been a dream to have comparing to now, where essentially you go from a database schema, you generate your application models and the types using Prisma, and then you have Nest generate the GraphQL schema, and then you have GraphQL CodeGen, which was created, I believe, by the Guild.
Yeah, correct.
Generate essentially the code that you import into your front-end application.
Yeah.
And this is code that essentially allows you to send these type-safe queries to your GraphQL API. And so really you get this end-to-end type safety.
Yeah.
And sort of like building on top of this idea, you mentioned rapid development, and I'm curious to hear, what does rapid development mean to you, and how do the tools that you use help you achieve that? I mean, you touched a bit on some of the stack that you use, but even more broadly, how do you think about rapid development?
So I think tools is one important thing. So you need to have tools that make your life easier and help you prevent from mistakes. I think if you do something manually, eventually you're going to forget how it works, or you forget the details, and it's very unlikely that your coworker is doing exactly the same thing as you do. So if you can bring something back to a single command or a single way to do it, and you can validate that that's the correct way, then you're already halfway there to having like a predictable app which scales. Because this, for a small application, doesn't really matter. But we have applications. I worked on an application with like 200 models in the schema file. So you can imagine that's pretty large. And that's not even a huge application. You guys here have probably seen larger. So predictability is the other important factor. So you have tools that make you do the right thing. And it should all be very predictable. So I think it's important, if you see a file name in the projects I work with, you should understand directly what kind of file it is. Is it a resolver, or is it a service that talks to the database, or a model, or an input file? And you should be able to understand what kind of domain it belongs to.
And so from that, I gather that tooling plays an important role, and also predictability in the workflows. I guess that also cascades from tooling too. I mean, does the tooling sort of behave consistently across different commands that might share something in common? But also libraries in terms of following conventions. I remember we had a conversation just before this where you were speaking about the importance of conventions, especially in teams.
Yeah, so naming is definitely an important aspect, I think, across the whole software development industry. Like, naming is one of these things we always discuss about because it's important. And things generally have just a few good names and a lot of bad names, potentially. But the convention here as well, for instance, in Prisma, I think the accepted default is that models are singular, right? Mm-hmm. This is something that we all kind of understand. But for a new developer, this is not obvious. I'm going to take a sip of water as well. So for a new developer, this is not obvious, and you really have to train them in thinking this way. So in order to do that, you first have to explain them, like, what is an entity? What is a model? What are we actually trying to model? And I think if you've been in software industry for like 10 or more years, like myself, it's kind of natural to think in these terms. I really think learning about database modeling changed how I view the world. I mean, not literally, but you start classify and identify things in a certain way.
Everything becomes a one-to-many or a many-to-many relation.
Right. And for me, like a cat and a dog extend animal. Like it's just how I look at it. It's not that I treat them differently, but that's the, like a car and a bike are both type of vehicle. It's just, that's just how it is. But you have to train in order to do this. And I think we live in a generation, in a time where there are so many great tools available that make sure that you don't need to know a lot of these things, but it's still important to understand some of these things. And for me, Prisma comes in really handy with this because it's opinionated, it's super well documented, it's very predictable in how it behaves and how it structures. And if you understand like maybe 5 to 10 concepts or constructs in this schema file, you can basically define your whole world around you doing this. This is what I really found. And it's easy to explain, which also is like a testament to its ease of use and it's predictable. And I see it as basically the DNA of the application. So we make sure that this is in place. And I always start reasoning about from the database first. And then in this case, Prisma, because that's kind of, in my apps, it's a one-on-one mapping. And adding tools that make this easier. This is basically taking a lot of work out of the hands of people while still giving them the ability to be flexible and creative. So to give you an example, a few years back, I tried to build backend tooling. And what I was doing was trying to hide everything away in libraries, trying to abstract it all away, which is great if you want to start. But then if somebody wants to extend, you cannot. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty terrible. And obviously I use my tools myself. So I figured I was like copying over the originals and then extending it. And it got messy very quickly. So the approach I'm taking right now is basically generate a bunch of code that is still clean, but it's very predictable. And every domain more or less looks the same. But you actually have the code and you really have the momentum to interrupt where you want to be and extend where you need to. Now, in order to make this generation easy, you don't want to go in and think about, okay, I'm going to make a ticket system. So I have like a ticket and ticket category and think about how you do all these conventions. I really want to get to the point where you can just basically say, generate for me everything that you need to do from ticket. Mm-hmm. And this is what I try to capture in the nxpm stack, one of my open source projects, where you can basically say, generate ticket, and the plural is tickets. And this is the name field, basically your label field. And it will generate Prisma schema, the backend API, GraphQL resolver, front-end admin interface. And it basically gets me back to something that Ruby on Rails did, or Cake PHP. I was a PHP dev. I think Django is the other one. Mm-hmm. Because this is something over the years, we lost it. And we started splitting out our backend and frontend, which all makes sense. I'm totally happy that we went that route. But I lost a whole bit of productivity where I could just say, scaffold this out for me and I can do the rest. Yeah. And this is something that I want to bring back. And this really helped teams with, like even junior devs, be productive pretty much directly because you don't really need to think about a lot of things. It's really hard to make mistakes because the generated parts, this will all go well. And then when you're actually coding, type safety will kick in to help you with the other, the work that you need to do. Right.
Thank you for sharing. And so you've essentially built this toolkit that you use a lot in the projects that you're building when you want to use this tech stack, right? I believe it's using this NX, the monorepo tool, Prisma, Nest.js, and either Angular or React on the front end.
That's it. I jokingly called it the PANG stack, Prisma, Angular, Nest, NX, and GraphQL. Okay. But then the A can be twisted with React. I actually added Ionic for mobile apps, so it's not really abbreviation anymore. Mm-hmm.
And how does your usage of Prisma sort of differ from one project to another? Do you see that there's a lot of sort of repeating patterns there? And you mentioned a lot, like this tooling that you have. Is this a big part in streamlining sort of your development, in usage of Prisma in different contexts?
I think I try to make it as uniform as possible. And a lot of times people ask the same kind of things. So they say, we need a chat system. And there's several ways how you can implement a chat system, but once you find a way that works, then I often suggest like, hey, I got something that works. I show them what the properties are, what can be done. For instance, having only a system with only one-on-one chat or a system with also group chats, that's kind of a difference in how you make this structure. But if somebody says, oh, this is exactly what I need, I generally start with copying over the Prisma file and the endpoints, and then we start looking at if the API, or if the front end does what we do. I'd really like to get to the point where I just have some sort of modules that I can grab off the shelf and say, oh, you want a multi-user chat? Here you go, install it.
Yeah, I had this feeling that you were sort of, this is what you were getting at. And I'm curious, so for you, a module consists of essentially the data model part, like the Prisma schema part of it, for example, to model, for example, multi-person chat interactions or whatnot. That's one aspect of it. And then there's also the GraphQL implementation of that.
Yeah.
And what are the other components? Do you see it as sort of like a vertical component that spans all the way from the database to the front end? Is that what a module is for you, at least in terms of your abstract thinking?
I think so, but I think technically it's like really hard to pull it all off. And I think if you go really opinionated, you get like to an application platform where everything looks the same, behaves the same, but also is not really flexible. And this is what I want to prevent, but because I went there. So the way I'm currently thinking about is basically use this code generation, which is what I'm using NX for. So NX has really powerful generation skills. And my idea is basically, instead of having a imperative structure of what you should generate, which it is today, like create this file, this content, I'd like to move more to basically a recipe idea where you define like the ingredients you have, maybe a piece of Prisma model, piece of GraphQL resolver, some front-end component definition, but not the actual component, and then be able to generate it if you will. So nxpm stack today, it's opinionated to use Nest, Angular, GraphQL, and Ionic. But there's not a reason why you can't use Go instead of Nest, because Prisma client's there for Go. We can use REST if somebody wants to. I mean, I don't understand why you would, but I guess, right? REST with OpenAPI has code generation skills, and you could use that. People could use React and React Native, and that should ideally be the same steps. Mm-hmm. And then if you think about it, you start to abstract one level higher. So maybe my recipe, the thing I have in mind, my recipe would be something like a Prisma file, but then not only the database Prisma, but also include instructions on what it should do on the back end, what it should do on the middle layer, what it should do on the front end.
This, one of the thoughts that it evokes is that for me, what I've noticed, especially looking at a lot of the community questions that come up, a lot of the questions at the end of the day seem to be data modeling questions. And once you sort of have an idea of how you can model a problem, and it's fascinating just to see, you can take a given problem like a chat functionality, and there's hundreds of different ways to model that. I mean, using Prisma or using really any relational database. And for a long time, we have thought about having something like a Prisma samples repository where you can actually explore different sort of data modeling patterns and see how they solve different solutions. But I'm glad to hear that other people are thinking about it. And thank you also for sharing, you know, how you sort of streamline your process. I guess by now you also feel more productive starting new projects.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. So my goal was to minimize the time I spent on doing the same things. So I want to quickly validate a program or an idea that I have or client have. I don't want to re-implement authentication ever again. And it's unlikely that I never won't. I will probably do it at some point, but I've did it so many times in my life that it's just a waste of time. Mm-hmm. But there's also not a good one-stop shop, at least in my perspective, that's self-hosted, doesn't tie into any cloud providers. Because a lot of people say use Auth0, which is great, perfect solution. But my clients often want just an all-in-one solution, being able to host at any place. So no vendor lock-in, just code they own, they can extend. And once they validate it and once it really works and they want to go on with the project, then you can look at what do we need to do to scale user access. So you can prepare a whole lot of these things. So be prepared that you're going to change it at some point. This is for me way more important than making a perfect system that works for anything, depending on a ton of providers.
Right.
And with regards to the samples, I'm actually super excited that I saw the Prisma Cloud offering, which has a sample library.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, when I saw this, I was like, this is awesome to contribute. Because a lot of ideas that I have are in some project, and I'd love to be able to I'd love these things to be out there for me to just able to point somebody at a link and say, this is the data model you can play with, and they can actually go ahead and play with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have like the data layers, your DNA, you can actually only validate it, according to me, by actually entering data in it, interacting with it, see if you can get the queries out, see if it's really the shape that you had in mind. And I think the new Prisma Cloud is a great solution for this. So
cool. I mean, thanks for sharing that. We can definitely discuss this in more detail. And so, what feature in Prisma do you most look forward to right now?
I think the main one is splitting up the DB schema or the Prisma schema into several domains. I think the term in data modeling world is the aggregate roots that I'm interested in.
Aggregate roots?
The aggregate roots. So your aggregate root is, for instance, your user model, and then you have related data to this user. So for instance, an email address, if a user can have many email addresses, then this is within the root of this user.
Mm-hmm.
Which in my project means they live in the same folder path. So they're grouped together. Also, these things should minimally leak out. So you should have very little cross-domain points. Right now, one of the downsides of my project is there's only one Prisma file. So in this Prisma file, there's a lot of crossing these domains. Because I need to define, let's say, the user in the ticket system. Again, I have a user model at the top. And now the ticket gets relationship to the user because the user created a ticket, or user is assigned to a ticket as the person resolving it. But now I also need to update the user model. And this is kind of, it's not really bad. It's pretty predictable. But if you really want to grow your app, it's way easier to have like little chunks that you can put in the right place. And then ideally Prisma figures it out. So this is something, but I understand the problem is difficult, and I've chatted with various people at the Prisma team, and I get to understand more and more what the complications are.
Yeah, it'll be curious. I think one of the main things today is that when you're working with your Prisma schema, you get quite rich help in VS Code thanks to the Prisma VS Code extension.
Yeah.
And I think that will be one of the main challenges. If we split this out, if we give this functionality in Prisma where you can split your Prisma schema into multiple files, can you still provide the same helpers? Like, for example, now when you define, say, a one-to-many relation between two models, essentially when you start defining the relation on one field, the moment that you already define the type as being the other model, it will automatically, if you just use the format function within a single button, it will add the other relation on the other side.
Yeah.
I think we call that the back relation. And so trying to really create that in an environment where you're splitting your schema file into multiple files. Thanks for sharing. This is definitely on our roadmap, and it will be a tricky one.
Yeah, no, I understand it. And I think it's also one of these things, it's there's a few good solutions, but it's really, really hard to mess up. And I do appreciate that Prisma team doesn't just mindlessly implement it and then figure out like we did something that doesn't work. So I'd rather wait and wait till it's something that we all happy with.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's something I could prototype and work with if I have some time left, which hardly ever happens. But if I have magically one weekend where I have nothing to do, I might give a shot at it, because I think for my use case, it will work. That wouldn't cover the things you mentioned, like VS Code extensions or being perfect. But I think it's interesting it's an interesting space to look at. Like, how are you going to scale? How you're going to manage a file? Because I think we can all agree at a certain level, any source code file is getting too long. It might be at 100 lines for you or 1,000 lines, but if you have a model file if you have 1,000 Prisma models in one file, it's probably not workable. So you need to figure out something. Another feature that I'm actually not really, I'm not really aware if it's being worked on, but something I'd love to see at some point is union types. So, or type inheritance. I think there's various ways to do it. So one type that can be extended by other, like they share the half of their fields and some of them have another fields. I think union types or polymorphic relations, I guess these things are kind of related.
Yeah. I saw that come up in one of the community feature requests. That'll definitely be an interesting one to look at.
Yeah. And
I'm curious, so you build a lot of these projects where you use Prisma and, of course, all of the other technologies. I'm curious, when it comes to deployment, do you normally operate the projects that you build, and which sort of architectures and which sort of deployment paradigms do you use, and how do you sort of treat the whole operational aspect of software development in the projects that you're working on?
It's a great question. So before a few months ago, when I was at the Kin Foundation, I had no apps in runtime that I was really responsible for. So that was a great thing by itself. So there was no PagerDuty, nothing to be hosted or kept alive. I mean, a few pet projects, for instance, for the foundation, we have our own software, but that doesn't really matter because if that one's down, there's maybe 15 people. They're all in the foundation. It's just one message like, hey, stuff is down, and I'll kick it back up. It's like, let's say it's in the family. But outside there, not so much. So I try to make it as easy as possible. So there's a few things that in the stack that I've been working on that I try to make easy that people often forget or oversee. One is a CI process. So if you generate a new project, it will automatically generate a GitHub Actions file for you and start running these tests. So you literally don't have to do anything. If you create a new repo, you push it up, it will start running these tests automatically. And I try to do the same thing with deployment. And I came to the conclusion the easiest thing, at least that I'm aware of, is Heroku. It's just the easiest way. You can programmatically configure the whole stack. You can automatically add a database. And if you use Redis for something or you want logging, you can do it as well. So that's what I kind of try to standardize on. And it's an easy sell for users because in the free platform, it's between $7 or $21, depending on how large your database is. And you can run simple production apps with this. And I also provide a Docker containerized solution and Docker Compose. So you can locally run it in production mode with every app built in production to see if it really works. And serverless, it's not something that really, I'm not sold on the idea. I mean, I guess I'm sold on the idea. It's not something that I really work with a lot. I didn't have a lot of projects that used it. And microservices, I did use them, but in most of the projects, this is just down the line. Mm-hmm. So I really try to provide a solution where it's easy to split off parts of your app. Now, NX in essence, it shares your repo up in applications and libraries. So when we look at a standard application, generation of my project, you have the API app, the web app, and the mobile app. So these are applications, but these are really just a shell. And every hard work, the heavy lifting, is done in libraries. And these libraries mix and match. And the nice thing is, if I want to have an API that just is responsible for only, let's say, the ticketing system for whatever reason, I can spin up a new app, call it Ticket API. I only include the ticket libraries, and it runs this slice of your application, of your library. So I really, with this structure, I try to prepare for people that want to split it up.
And in this example that you were giving, is this an example where the ticketing API would also have its own database, or is this, or it's really left up to you to decide depends, in that moment how far along you want to go with this decoupling?
So I think for most microservices, people are, I guess general consensus is like one API connects to one database, and the database only connect to by one API. So you're not going to have two APIs writing to the same thing. In reality, though, that's not always the case, and it's sometimes perfectly justifiable to step away from this rule.
Okay, we had a slight technical challenge, but we're now back for the second part of this interview. And so we spoke a lot about your experiences with Prisma, using it in sort of different environments. And you spoke a bit about your sort of the new role that you've taken doing education in this space.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear more about how you use Prisma as an educational tool at the foundation, BeeSoft Labs, that you founded, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we have a foundation where we teach people to be software developers. One of the things we really try to teach them and we try to drive home is you don't need to know anything into full detail in order to be successful as a developer. And this is one of the reasons why I think Prisma is a great tool for education, because it really allows you to focus on what you want to achieve without going into too deep on how to do it. So our students already know TypeScript and they know what an object is or what a class is or a model. They have this idea and Prisma maps into this very good. So that's one side. I think as I mentioned before, data is like the DNA of your application. So if you shape it in your data and if you put it in there, you can handle it. So that's a good thing to know. It's good for them to understand how objects relate and how all that kind of stuff works. Prisma gives a very natural fit for that. And then the second is you don't need to know all the details. So we do tell them why a relational database exists and what the properties are, why that's important, why you want to have consistency in data and not duplicate things all around. But we also explain them and try to drive home, you don't need to know all these things in order to be successful. And we had students that already had SQL experience and they got in touch with Prisma and all of a sudden they were super happy because they could do all the things they knew from SQL, but they didn't have to do all the hard work and they could instead just use it as if it was some sort of third-party library, which, I mean, technically it is.
Right. Yeah. And you spoke a little bit about the data structure of an app, like being its DNA. And I'm curious, how do you think about the Prisma schema as sort of being the main interface for developers and also in your projects? Prisma schema, in case you're not familiar, I think by now most Prisma users are familiar with it, is a single source of truth, both for your database schema we generate with Prisma Migrate, the migrations based on the state of your Prisma schema and the state of your database schema. And then the second part, of course, is all of the generated Prisma client that includes all of these rich types that, give you that sort of confidence as you're writing code. But because it is a new sort of format and a new sort of way to define your data model, what has your experience been like, both in your experience and also in teaching developers Prisma?
That's a great question. I think initially I was a bit hesitant before Prisma 1 because it was like a new DSL and you have to kind of buy into it. But it convinced me fast enough because the alternatives are basically pretty bad. So you either have data living in your database in the structure and you have some application logic and you need to magically make sure it all works, which more often doesn't than does. And so having one place to store these kind of things is, I think, probably one of the main features. And if I get invited to an app that already uses Prisma and they want my advice or consultancy for something, first thing I do is inspect the schema and try to wrap my head around what they try to do. Often you see there are patterns that are not best practices or people try to migrate something they had into Prisma, which might not be a natural fit because of something they did in the past. But I really think it's a nice and a great common way to reason about how your data should work. And there's a lot of cases where people ask me about building a certain type of feature like a chat system or a ticket system or something common. A blog is an obviously other common thing. And you can just pass around the Prisma schema. And if somebody understands it, then they probably know how to build the rest. And then the queries kind of get obvious with a few certain exceptions. But it really allows you to define your desire of how the data should work, and the rest is kind of evident based on this.
I see. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for sharing your experience. It's been quite insightful, despite the technical challenge that we had in the middle. Is there anything else, Bram, that you would like to share before we wrap up the interview?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's been super meeting you all and being here in person after seeing you online. And I'm super excited about Prisma. I'm excited about the future of the project. Prisma 3 is coming out soon.
Yeah, I think it came out last week. So 3.0.1. Of course, this wasn't a major sort of architectural change. It was just we adopted recently semantic versioning. And now that we're adhering to semantic versioning strictly, we had a lot of preview features that have been in preview state for a long time. And releasing them meant that they did include some breaking changes. We do believe that this is for the best, the long-term best, in the best interests of most developers working with Prisma.
Yeah.
But still, there were some breaking changes, hence the major version bump. So that's 3.0.1, and next week there will be also the next release. But yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm super excited. It's inspiring to see that you managed to keep these versions rolling, new versions dripping in. My list a year ago was pretty large, and it starts drying all up. So I'm super excited to see. I think Prisma team's doing a great job in explaining why things are hard to implement as well. It's not just saying like, yeah, we're not going to do it. And yeah, in general, I look forward to the new projects and the online environment where you can share snippets of Prisma files and actually work with it online without having to set up locally. I think also from an educational point of view, gives a whole new area for us to explore and see how we can do this, because we can basically use it as an educational tool for like, hey, go build your project on Prisma Cloud and send it to me. And it's easier for me to review it because I can just click a link, see if it works, and give my comments there. So
yeah, and of course to our viewers, you can expect a lot more in the near future from the cloud product. I believe you've already tried it out, and we have a lot of new features. We just had the query console where you can actually start a new Prisma project just from your browser. You can go to cloud.prisma.io and check that out, and you can create a project. You can pick an existing schema and have that populate, and then you can already in the browser essentially use Prisma Client to submit queries and get a feel for what Prisma Client looks like.
Yeah, and fill in the data if I'm correct. So you can really...
you have the online data browser, which is essentially something like a hosted version of Prisma Studio. Of course, you have also the ability to invite collaborators and give them roles so that they can either just view data, edit data, and so on. But really, this is just sort of the beginning, and there's a lot more to come. Bram, before we wrap up, where can folks find you online?
You can find me on Twitter, bman_NL. You can check my GitHub profile. I try to be pretty active there, although my trip to Europe kind of put me on low contribution modes, but that'll be up once I'm back. And on my YouTube channel, bmandev. And I will have an interview with Dom from the Prisma Client team.
That's right.
Where we're going to go in depth into Prisma Client. So if you ever wonder what brings it to life, what's the magic, he did a great job explaining it. And hope to see you all there.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you can get notified about new live streams and new content that we're releasing on a regular basis. And with that, we'll say goodbye.